Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Money Side Up podcast. This is the finance podcast for all things money for Australians all over the world and back at home, covering a huge range of topics from transferring money all over the world to relocating pets to different countries. Joining me today is my friend and colleague, William Cant from New South Wales. G'day, Will.
Hey, Jarrad. Great to be here as always. Now, as a quick legal disclaimer, we always like to do right at the start. The podcast is, information only, education only. Definitely don't race off the back of today's listening and go and make any drastic changes with your finances. Seek some tailored advice from, your financial advisor, us, accountants, whoever it's going to be. But yeah, really, really interesting one we've got today, Jarrad. There's a great interview coming up with the guys from Wise, previously TransferWise, and I'm really excited for this one because a lot of our clients use Wise. So I think it's going to be a very interesting interview. But before we get into that, I really just wanted to talk about, the Australian interest rate dilemma that we're seeing. The RBA met quite recently. The Australian market was factoring in about a 92% chance that they would cut rates by 25 basis points. And to the shock horror of any mortgage holder in the nation, they didn't. Unemployment has just gone up though, and now the market is factoring in a 100% chance of a cut in August when they meet. I think it's August 15th or 16th or something they meet next. What's your thoughts on this? Do you see this next cut potentially happening, dusting the crystal ball off? And how shocked were you with the previous decision?
Yeah, look, very shocked. Given the last RBA governor and the sort of non-event that was for such a long period of time of doing nothing, quite surprised that we didn't get the rate cut in July. I think very likely we get it in August, but also quite shocked at the commentary. The fact that they're really keeping their foot on the neck of the Australian economy. We're probably 50, 75, 100 basis points above neutral in terms of what that policy is doing. So by that, we're really in a position where it's designed to curb spending at these high rates. Speaking with a few of our clients, the only ones that were happy were really those with large cash balances earning interest. But it was really those trying to get into the property market. Whilst the 25, 50 basis point rate cuts don't really have a material impact on borrowing capacity, it's always fascinating to see just how quickly that drives sentiment. All of a sudden, we've got the rate cut. It's now time to go and buy that $2 million home that when rates were 25% more expensive was, for some stupid reason, unaffordable. But it just opens up the floodgates. So yeah, look, I think it's likely we get the cut in August. I think it's likely we'll get one or two more this year. The economic data is all telling the same story. The risk of inflation spiking, again, I think is a bit of a non-event. And I think, obviously, as an expat myself and for much of our community, it'll be very interesting to see what that does to the Aussie dollar as well. Although I don't think there'll be a lot more weakness from, where we're trading at the moment.
I feel like sometimes it's almost a flip of the coin. You think you can look at the data as much as you want and see the direction it's going and think, oh yeah, this is the sensible decision, that anyone in that position would make. But then sometimes just flip a coin, heads or tails, whether, they're actually going to make that decision or not. So it can be definitely quite frustrating for a lot of mortgage holders in Australia, waiting for these rates to continue to come down. You hear one thing in the media and the news, the July meeting, as we touched on, all four major banks were expecting a rate cut, 92% chance according to the market. So really, really strong data that there should have been a cut and there wasn't. And it can be disheartening, I know, for a lot of people who, feel like they're really feeling the pinch of this cost of living crisis and, the price of their mortgage repayments. But as you touched on, these rate cuts probably a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Dramatized, I suppose. They seem a lot bigger than what they are, if that's even a word. A 25 basis point cut on a $1 million mortgage is what, maybe $100, $200 a month or something like that you save. So not a massive amount, but definitely still money in your pocket as opposed to, whoever you're banking with. The other thing, Jarrad, I wanted to talk about was this big, beautiful bill that passed over in the United States. What's your thoughts on this? There was a lot of changes to it as it, passed through all of its stages. But anything that our listeners need to be aware of there?
Yeah, look, there definitely were a few iterations on this one and probably a few iterations, I guess, on Trump's policies in general over the last quarter. We started with Liberation Day, the one big, beautiful bill, going through the various stages. I mean, I think, in a nutshell, at the end of the day, and we touched a lot on this in our recent market update, was the fact that the tax cuts are largely been extended. So that's where a lot of the spending effectively will go as a result of this bill. We're going to hit about 15% of GDP in national debt by 2034. Now, whether it's 11%, 12%, 15%, it's a very large number. There doesn't seem to be a line in the sand where the market's terribly concerned. And a lot of that's going to be taken from Medicaid. But I think the big one was really on this whole remittance and, what that surcharge was going to look like, particularly for Aussie expats sending money out of the US. That started with an original proposal of 5%. And now we're down at 1%. There's a raft of other considerations for Aussies in the US that, as you very much an expert in, Will, around super contributions and property and tax treatment of all this other stuff. But I think the end result there has been a positive one at 1% as opposed to, that 5% that was proposed.
Yeah, I definitely had some clients that were a bit nervous when it first got proposed, and 5% of all money leaving the States. And definitely had some people that were very nervous about it, especially with their plans and intentions over the next few years of what they wanted to do. It's going to be a big chunk of, tax coming out of their and money. Well, look, let's get into the interview today, Jarrad. We've got a really, really interesting one, I should say, that I'm very excited for today with Alex from Wise. A lot of our clients use Wise. I've never really heard anyone say a bad word about Wise. They seem to be really cost effective, really easy to use, great way to transfer money across currencies, across countries. So let's dive straight into the interview.
Let's do it.
So as we have talked about, we have an awesome interview for everyone here today on the Money Side Up podcast. We are interviewing Alex Lombardo from Wise. Now, I'm really, really keen for this chat. I'd say 95% of my clients use Wise. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say a bad word about Wise. Seems to be the go-to app or intermediary for transferring money across different currencies. And I know that a lot of my clients in the US transferring money back, they find it so much easier, than their banking providers or anyone else they've used. So really, really excited to get into this today with you, Alex, and welcome.
I was going to say that's extremely high praise. Lovely to be here, and thank you so much for the great feedback about Wise.
Yeah, perfect. Look, let's get straight into the questions then today. So, what makes Wise different from traditional banks or other money transfer platforms?
Yeah, so I think that's the $1 million question, or in our customer's case, the multi-billion-dollar question. So I think the biggest difference is transparency. So, say for instance, you're sending money with a bank, they claim it's fee-free, but the amount that arrives on the other end is mysteriously less than you expected. So, what happened there? So that's because the real cost is hidden in a marked up exchange rate. So it's an old trick, and frankly, it costs people a fortune. And internally at Wise, we've actually estimated that fortune to be around £200 billion in hidden fees a year, which is absolutely crazy. So the old school system doesn't, align with Wise's core values, and so we decided to build something ourselves. So Wise was effectively born out of the idea that moving money should be as simple as sending an email. So we use the real mid-market exchange rate, the one that you see on Google, and we just add a small upfront fee for the services. You see exactly what you're paying and exactly what the other person gets, and there are no nasty surprises once the transaction is completed. And so for an Aussie expat in Singapore in particular, who's sending money home, that transparency is everything. So you know precisely how much is landing in that Australian bank account, whether it is paying a bill or helping out the family or managing your investments.
I can definitely see how that £200 billion adds up. Like, it sounds like such a high number and crazy number, but I had a client just recently transferred that they sold a property in the US and they were transferring the proceeds of the sale back. Yeah. And the difference between Wise and some other providers was, an outstanding amount of money. So how do you guys manage to keep, your fees so competitive? Like, how does that work from an internal sense of the business?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to our mission. Our mission is money without borders, which includes making money transfers instant, convenient, transparent, and cheaper. And we knew we couldn't do that by using the old banking system. So we basically built our own. And so instead of sending money through the traditional multi-layered correspondent banking network, we built this global payments infrastructure. And the way that I think about it, it's like a sophisticated digital system of local bank accounts. So if we sort of bring that to life for an example, if we use the example of a customer in Singapore sending money to a person in Australia, when you send that money from Singapore to Australia, you effectively pay into our Singapore bank account. And then we, being Wise, would subsequently pay out from our Australian bank account to that person in Australia. So, in that example, the money hasn't crossed borders, and that cuts out the middleman and their associated costs. And the coolest part of that is that because of that infrastructure, we're able to pass on those savings directly to our customers. And so that network lets our 15.6 million or so customers send money to over 160 countries. And we've also invested quite heavily in automation, smart tech to keep our own costs low. So last year, I think we saved around £2 billion in fees, which is absolutely incredible.
Some staggering numbers,
Wow.
that's for sure.
Absolutely. Alex, obviously there's been a lot of sort of change iterations, with the various providers in this space. Could you tell us maybe a little bit about how Wise has sort of transitioned from the early days of getting into this space to sort of what we know as Wise today?
Yeah, so I think like the way that it started was that it was a classic story of frustration turning into innovation. Wise was originally called TransferWise. It started in 2011 by two Estonian friends, Tibet and Christo, who at the time were living in London. And so the story goes, Tibet was being paid in euros, but needed pounds for his everyday living. And Christo was being paid in pounds, but needed to pay a mortgage back in euros. And so they were both getting hammered by their banks with terrible exchange rates and higher fees. And so they came up with this brilliantly simple idea whereby each month they would check the real mid-market rates on the internet, and using that mid-market rate, they would, so Tibet would basically put euros into Christo's Estonian bank account, and Christo would put the equivalent pounds into Tibet's UK account. And so through executing that arrangement, they were able to completely bypass the bank fees. And so that simple and fair idea is what powers Wise today. So in a nutshell, like it basically grew from two mates helping each other out to, like I said, the 15.6 million customers. And so over time, that has grown across 160 plus countries, but also expanding our product set from the initial multi-currency account to being able to send transfers and do conversions between different currencies, to being able to use your Wise debit card, to even being able to invest the balances your Wise account into different types of assets.
Mm. That's brilliant. I imagine the mortgage and the property scenario being quite a common one, and especially amongst our community, Aussie expats. There's properties, there's mortgages all over the world. But could you tell us maybe a little more about what the Australian expat, or just what the general sort of community of the Wise users are typically using their Wise account for?
Yeah, so this is something I was particularly keen to geek out on a bit today. And I'd also love to get your perspective, Jarrad, as both a Wise customer and expat. But the way I think about it is like if we map out the end-to-end journey of an Aussie expat. So let's say I have this friend, Erin, who may or may not be someone that I actually know. Erin has lived her whole life in Australia. She hasn't traveled much. She does own her own home, which is her principal place of residence. And she's also really financially savvy, not only in terms of how she saves, but also how she grows her wealth. Erin has this awesome opportunity to work in Singapore for a few years and live the Aussie expat life. Erin goes for it, and she opens up a Wise account to support her with that journey. And so as part of the relocation, Erin needs Singapore dollars. So in her Wise multi-currency account, she can deposit Australian dollars and then convert that Australian dollars into Singapore dollars using the mid-market rate with no hidden fees, and is therefore able to fund her relocation smoothly. So let's say Erin still wants to keep the property that she owns in Australia. And being the financially savvy person that she is, she rents it out as an investment property. The property is negatively geared, and to cover the cost gap, Erin deposits her Singapore salary into her Wise account, and then converts a portion of it into Australian dollars to cover the gap of the investment property. Let's say 6 months in, Erin is fully settled into her place in Singapore. She's absolutely loving life. She's doing a really good job managing her finances, and she notices that she's saving a lot more, particularly given the low progressive tax rate in Singapore compared to what she would have had in Australia. And so with that, she does a couple of things. So firstly, she converts an additional portion of her salary into Australian dollars using her Wise account and makes voluntary contributions to her Australian super. But whilst Erin does a really good job with her medium to long term wealth creation, she also likes to live in the moment. She likes to enjoy life. And in true Aussie fashion, she decides to take a short plane ride to Bali, once again using her Wise multi-currency account. She can convert the Singapore salary into Indonesian rupiah, and then use her Wise debit card to cover any expenses during the trip. So yeah, there are definitely some other use cases, but I hope that provides a bit of flavor of what an expat can do with their Wise account. But maybe just quickly to you, Jarrad. Apologies if I'm going against the usual way that we do the podcast. But how, as an expat and a Wise customer, how do you use your Wise account?
Yeah, look, it's definitely that. I mean, a lot of our clients, it's very much on the property side. So transferring funds back to Australian dollars, especially while the exchange rate, is what it is. And, hopefully Erin got her job, years ago and didn't have to convert too many Australian dollars into Singapore, because I think it'd be about, $100 to one these days with the exchange rate.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a joke, just not a very funny one. But yeah, so that's very common, transferring funds back, whether that's every month or it's every quarter or it's some sort of voluntary portion of the salary from Singapore to Australian dollars. Given the way the exchange rate has been for the, better part of 12, 18, 24 months, it has been very appealing. Lump sums, regular contributions back to Australia. The super contribution one is always interesting. And I mean, that's not really an exchange rate consideration. That's more a tax planning consideration. There is no capital gains tax in Singapore. So, one strategy that the Erins of the world would be thinking about, and they certainly are as clients of ours, is, all right, convert to Australian dollars, but invest outside of super where there is no capital gains tax, as opposed to the 10 to 15 inside super. But, great to hear Erin is putting her money to work, and particularly into Australian dollars. So yeah, that's definitely what we're seeing a lot of. And then we have those clients, I guess, that are perhaps working in less regulated countries, let's call it, where they may not have a lot of trust around your traditional banking systems. So, Saudi being a great example, Indonesia, Thailand, many other places in this region. So that's where that Wise account becomes really handy as a place for the salary to be deposited, to then go into whatever currency they actually needed in long term.
Yeah, I think maybe it's not it's agnostic of being an expat. But here's an example of how I use it is, at my previous employer, I was allocated a lot of restrictive stock units as part of my compensation. And because I worked for a US parent company, the RSUs were being granted and vested to me in a US trading account. So it was allocated to me. And so whenever I sold those shares, they were sold into US dollars. And I remember the first time trying to get that back to Australia. So I wanted to test out a small portion of that. And I was using my local Big Four bank account without even thinking of using wires. And I was absolutely pummeled by the cross currency exchange fees. So yeah, like using your Wise account in in that sort of example is really good to sort of minimize those fees.
And especially when you, as you said, if you're doing trades, consistently, whether it's something like a salary that you're consistently transferring money back, like that little bit extra money that you're saving using something like Wise as opposed to one of the traditional banks, that adds up massively if you're doing it every single week or every single month. Do you see any, really big mistakes that people make, Alex, when they're transferring money internationally? Like, do you see any common mistakes that people usually make?
Yeah, so I think like the biggest mistake, hands down, is not looking beyond the traditional banks. So for years, banks have relied on customer inertia. Australians in particular, they have, I'm not sure if you guys remember those old like Dolomite accounts that they've had since they're like 50 years old. And they just assume that sending money internationally is expensive and slow. And so they just don't bother to shop around. I think the second mistake is getting drawn into the zero fee offers without checking the exchange rates that they're actually getting. So the real cost is always hidden in that rate. And so Wise actively tries to solve this directly. So for example, like on the website, we actually have a comparison tool which shows what you'll get with Wise versus like other providers. And so from that, you're able to make a clear and informed decision on what is the best service for you. And we also have things like rate alerts so that you can where you can get like a notification when like the desired exchange rates hits. And so ultimately, it's all about sort of overcoming those mistakes and putting the power back into the customer's hands so they can move their money in the best possible time and in the best possible way.
I think you touched on something really interesting there too, which is the visibility piece of it, right? Like you can clearly see what you're being charged. So when a client, let's say I was going to transfer $10,000 overseas to pound or whatever it's going to be, how do you structure your fees, and how do I, as the customer or the consumer using that product, how do I see it, in front of me laid out?
Yeah, so like once again, like transparency is one of our golden rules. It's a core part of our mission. So unlike the banks that hide fees in the marked up exchange rates, like we do the opposite. So we give you the real mid-market exchange rate, which is the one that you see on Google and Reuters, and then we clearly show you our fee up front. So it's a small fee that varies depending on things like the currency that you're using, the amount, and how you're actually paying for it. But the key thing is that you see every last cent before you hit send. So our calculator is right there on the website and the app. And so what you see is exactly what you get. So there's no like smoke or mirrors or anything like that would surprise you after the fact.
Well, it's definitely helpful, I think, especially when people are trying to work out, I need the recipient to receive X and not knowing what fees might be incurred on the way. What about timeframes, Alex? I mean, we obviously dealing with some, very high net worth Australians all over the world, transferring large sums, property deposits, super contributions, investment accounts. And understandably, it can be quite nerve-wracking transferring $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, 100,000 through anyone, but, particularly to a different country, and then it taking 2 or 3 or 4 days for that money to show up. You're wondering, where is it? Hitting refresh. What are the typical timeframes with Wise? So, let's say Singapore to Australia, Hong Kong to Australia, the other direction perhaps. What are the sort of timeframes people can expect?
Yeah, so like once again, like moving money instantly is once again like a core part of our mission. So right now, I think 65% of our transfers are actually instant. So that means arriving in less than 20 seconds. And then I think about 95% arrive within 24 hours. So like to your point, like the days of waiting 3 to 5 business days for your money to crawl across the globe, should be over. So for hubs like Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, or Australia, like it can often be just a matter of hours or sometimes even minutes. Like I was even testing it the other day, sending it from like a single Australia person to a Singapore person. Because of like the infrastructure that we've set up, we were able to complete that transaction in seconds, which is really, really cool. So yeah, I think it depends a little on like how you pay, but we always give you a delivery estimate before you confirm the transfer. And so you know exactly when your money will effectively land. And you know, we're getting really faster and faster as we build up that global payments infrastructure.
Mm. No, that's brilliant. And I mean, I guess the other sort of common question, I mean, there's a lot of, I'll, use the term loosely, competitors in this space, the good, the bad, and everyone in between. What, I guess, in terms of, safety, security, peace of mind for people in actually shifting their funds, to Wise to sort of make the transfer happen, what's Wise sort of doing in the background to keep that money safe, to give, customers that sort of a surety?
Yeah, so this is something that we take quite seriously. So while we're built like a technology company, we're actually regulated like finance institution. So firstly, we're not a bank, so we're effectively a registered e-money provider, and so that means unlike a bank, we can't lend out your money. We are required by law to safeguard and keep your money safe. So that's really important to us. And so typically your money is kept in accounts with top tier global banks and is completely separate from our own operating funds. So basically like your money is always your money. But then on like things like the data side, we use things like advanced encryption and things like requiring two-factor authentication to protect our customers and their accounts. But yeah, just ultimately, like we have over 70 licenses around the world, including ASIC, now we're here in Australia. And so we're held to the highest global standard in terms of the controls that we need to put in place to support our customers.
And is there a limit on how much you can transfer with Wise, Alex? Is it different for each currency, or is there an actual limit of how much someone could transfer in one go?
Yeah, so there are limits, but they're typically very high and designed to handle everything from sending out a few dollars to a mate to purchasing a property. So these limits are set by local regulations in each country and also varies depending on the payment method that you use. So I recommend to listeners to check our website for guidance on the limits across each country. But if I use an example, an Australian customer can make a transfer up to, I think it's $5 million from your Wise account. So these days in the Sydney market, you would probably they'd probably be able to buy you a shed in someone's backyard. Also, a joke, Jarrad. Yeah, like
Probably pretty accurate actually, man, at the moment.
I was going to say like, pretty
Might get the car bay too.
half joking. But yeah, like in all seriousness, like if you're planning to do like large transfers, our website has all the details for each currency, and for things like property purchases, we also have a specialist team that can help guide you through the process to make sure that it's pretty seamless.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about then the solutions that you guys provide. So you've touched on two of them a little bit. Let's delve into them a bit more. The multi-currency account, the Wise debit card. You said these are two things that you see people using quite frequently. What are the pros and cons of each? How do they work? Run us through those two options that you guys provide.
Yeah, happy to. So like, I think firstly with the Wise multi-currency account. So like I would position that as the one account for your international life. And so it's the perfect tool for, like, I would consider it to be the perfect tool for any Australian expat. So, think of it this way. Instead of having to open a new bank account every time you move, you effectively have one account that lets you hold and switch between 40 currencies. You can move around the world and the account moves with you. But I think the real magic for expats is the ability to get local account details in 9 different countries. So I think like you've got Australia, Singapore, USD, pounds as an example. So that means you can be can be living in Singapore, but you can still get paid your salary, pension, or rent, or from an investment into your Australian account details with no fees. So it puts you in control of your money no matter where you are. And then when you have like the Wise debit card, it's your passport to spending like a local anywhere in the world. It's connected to that Wise multi-currency account that I just mentioned. So I've been traveling a lot for work, and so I go to London. I'm able to use my Wise debit card to purchase a coffee. I could go out to dinner in Singapore, and it effectively automatically converts the money from your balance at the real mid-market exchange rate with just our small transparent fee that I mentioned before. So there are no sneaky transaction fees or marked up rates like you would get with most bank cards. It also works perfectly in Australia too. It's like the one card for your entire financial life, whether you're home or abroad. You can manage everything. You can freeze your card, check your spending, right within the Wise app. So I have a lot of people, like family and friends, that whenever they go overseas in particular, they're going to different countries, they just use that exclusively as their travel card.
That makes sense. And Alex, you mentioned the case of Erin as your real or fictitious friend earlier, getting paid into her Wise account. Is that something you're seeing more and more? And I guess, are there any restrictions with Wise or in certain countries and licensing for Aussie expats to, I guess, get paid their salary directly into that Wise account?
Yeah, I think it's just it's once again, it comes back to the certain limits that you have depending on a particular country. But yeah, I would say it's a game changer for expats. So the Wise account, it gives you, like I said, it gives you those local account details for 9 different countries, and you basically get paid like a local without the fees. So if you're an Aussie working in Singapore, your employer can pay your salary directly into your Singapore local account details. And once again, if you have, rental property back home, you can derive rental income from that. But effectively, you can switch back and forth between local account details depending where you are on the world.
That makes sense. And what about, as far as, I guess, the traditional banks? I mean, the closest we sort of see them entering, with probably the exception of 1 or 2 here in Singapore, is really this whole, become a platinum customer and, we won't bend you over quite as aggressively, but, we'll still take our fair share. Are you seeing that the banks are actually going to get into this space in any way, whether it's sort of digital cards or multiple currencies across borders, slashing fees and genuinely competing in this space? Or do you think it'll largely be left to the sort of the likes of Wise and other fintech players in this space?
Well, interestingly, I think Wise is actually propelling that on 2 fronts. So for example, one of our core offerings is called Wise Platform, where we effectively, at the global payments infrastructure that we have set up for our Wise customers, we can also implement that for the traditional banks. So we have one partnership as an example. So in Singapore, we partner with Standard Chartered to support them with their cross-border transfers. But I think the other front is that we really stick to our mission. So as part of delivering against that mission, where we advocate quite significantly in terms of promoting that transparency, is that includes engaging the relevant government agencies to be able to promote that theme of transparency, which then encourages the traditional banks to follow suit.
So is that where you see then that really, I suppose the industry heading in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, cross-border money transfers, it's such a big area of contention and issues for a lot of Australian expats. Do you see there being a lot more visibility, a lot more transparency in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, or, any other direction you potentially see the market going?
Yeah, it's a great question, Will. And it's something that we talk about quite a bit within Wise, and it's really close to our heart. So, I think as our lives become more and more digital, our financial relationships will continue to extend across borders. So you have people that that work, spend, and invest internationally. And you have businesses that hire and sell anywhere. And so right now, the amount of cross-border transfers is like this year is 32 trillion pounds. So that's a really big number, and that number is only going to increase. So for Wise, the future is what we're building right now, which is a world without where money has no borders. And so if I think about like the next 3 to 5 years, the world of cross-border payments will continue to move much closer to being instant, transparent, convenient, and cheaper, and hopefully making the old ways of moving money feel increasingly outdated. So like I said, like external forces are definitely working in our favor. There's a growing trend of financial conduct regulators not tolerating banks charging cross-border hidden fees to customers. And so as that trend grows, and in a future where a future world of transparent fees, you'll have consumers and businesses who will be even more actively looking for cheaper alternatives. So for expats specifically, like hopefully that means managing your global financial life will feel as seamless as managing it in one country. And so for Wise, like that's awesome, because we already have that infrastructure in place, to be able to bring that to fruition. And it's a really exciting time for us, and our mission is to lead that change.
Yeah, look, I think it's such a great mission that you guys have, because you're doing right by the customer and the client, but at the same time, you guys you're a growing business, you're profitable, obviously. And as financial advisors, what we want by our clients is the right thing. If our client says to us, I'm going to move $100,000 over, I'm going to do it with, HSBC or something, and this is the fee. And, we can say to them, well, look, potentially look at these other options where you might save a couple of $1,000 on that transfer. Like, it can be a massive, massive amount. Look, Alex, it's been awesome interviewing today and hearing the inner workings of Wise, and you can definitely tell that you're passionate about the business and the direction it's going. And I think it's a very exciting thing because, as I said, our clients, love using a platform that is easy to use, but obviously very, very cost effective. Just as a final question for today for you, Alex, what are your top 3 tips for any Australian expats, managing their finances across borders? What would be your top 3 tips for them?
The ultimate question. So I think like the first tip would be understand the total cost of the transfer. It's important to look beyond the advertised fee and check the exchange rate that you're given. As I've said, Wise is quite deliberate in empowering our customers to get that understanding. And even if you aren't a Wise customer, just take the time to educate yourself on why certain transfers cost you that much. Because the last thing you want is to do a big transfer and you lose, 10%. Like, I don't want to exaggerate, but it could be that amount. The second tip is simplify a multi-currency account. So rather than juggling multiple bank accounts, consider an account that is designed for effectively international use, particularly for the expats. And then I think the final thing is factor in the transfer speed. So if you think about the correspondent banking networks, they take days to be able to complete transactions. The time for like how long it takes for money to arrive is a huge consideration. And so the technology now exists for much faster payments. And so you shouldn't have to wait for days. It should be hours or minutes or seconds.
Yeah. So what's the cost? Is it transparent? And is it convenient? A good way to summarize.
Exactly. Long-term mission.
Well, I did warn our listeners that it was going to be a great interview. I think that was one of the better ones we've done. It was definitely interesting listening to how Wise has built their business up, how they work, how they help, everyday, customers transfer money much more transparently, have a lot of visibility around what your fees are going to be, but then also saving a hell of a lot in fees as well too with those transfers. Great interview with Alex. Definitely check out Wise as an option, guys. Not financial advice. Obviously, shop around and look at all your options, but check out Wise, check out the app. the multi-currency account, debit card, all of those services they provide, and see if it could be something that's right for you. Now, as always, guys, with this podcast, we do release an episode on the last Wednesday of every single month. We interview an expert in every single episode. You can find the podcast on any of your major streaming platforms. So whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere that you listen to your podcast, you'll be able to find us. And really importantly, this podcast is for you, the listeners. So if you do want us to interview someone specific, or you have an idea of a certain industry or anything that you want us to delve into for you, we love hearing from our listeners, and we love hearing what your thoughts are and what you want us to delve into. It is designed for expats all around the globe. So if you have something that you want us to someone to interview or a topic to dive into, please let us know.
Thanks, Will. And obviously let other people know, if you find this podcast of value, if it's shedding some light on some otherwise confusing topics, please do spread the word. We do this for you guys essentially to hopefully educate, inform, pull some of the layers of mystery away from some of these products and areas of personal finance. So let people know. As always, we would appreciate reviews, 5 stars preferable, 3 stars if you thought it's garbage, or if you have constructive feedback, do please let us know. We want to continue doing this. We'd like to continue reaching out to more Australians all over the world, but hugely grateful for everyone giving us your time. As always, we look forward to speaking with you all in about a month's time. But as Will said, let us know if you have any questions, topics, or ideas. Until next time, we'll speak soon.
Thanks, guys.